films are about exteriors. They're about surfaces, they're about gestures, they're about facial expressions, poses. Oh, okay, all right, talking into the microphone. They're about clothing.
We have some directors in the house.
Right. They're about clothing, right? Novels are about interiors, right? They're about psychological transformations and just thoughts and these two versions of your work are very different in very different media, and I wondered what you thought of their relationship.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming tonight and seeing the film. As you heard, I've worked with a lot of writers over the years, and a lot of them have been here, and I've heard many great things about this series, and so I'm really happy to be a part of it. The Danish Girl as a book, it is a very interior story, and it literally is an interior story. This is a story of a transgender woman coming to understand who she really is and who she wants to be. And this was at a time, as you saw, when there were no role models for her to look to, no examples for her to follow, no representation in the media. So everything about who she was and who she could be came from within her. And as a prose writer, this is a natural, and prose is natural for that kind of depiction. The kind of fiction that I love to read, or a kind of fiction I love to read, has a good deal of interiority, and prose allows us to get inside a character. I love books that get me very close to a character's heart and mind. I love that kind of fiction, and that's what I wanted to do with The Danish Girl. And I knew that adapting it to the screen would be a challenge, because that journey, for the most part, is interior. And how would they show it? How do they show that interior journey? A couple things that I did that then I see playing out in the film. One, I had to come up with. I had to figure out what kind of language I was going to use to write this story. The book is written in third person, close to the two characters, and so it switches between point of view of Einar when Lili was living as Einar, and then the wife, back and forth, just like a marriage. It really kind of sees the story from the 2 points of view of the marriage, and that was very illuminating as I was thinking about the story, and allowed me to get into the interior. And in the film, of course, it's a love story, and they're using the two sides of the story to tell it, and that's how they get inside. But there was also something else I wanted to do with the language. And I knew that because they were artists, they were very aware of. They spent a lot of their lives thinking about creating beauty and depicting beauty and rendering even heightened beauty. The style of Gerda's paintings are sort of hyper-real. The paintings of Lili are hyper-real. They show a kind of ecstatic beauty. And I wanted to find a language that could do that. And so I was very aware of trying to just make this story through prose. It's hard to say this as a writer, but this is what I was telling myself. It's hard to say this in public because I'll sound ridiculous, but I'm going to say it. I wanted it to read beautifully. And exactly what that meant, I had to figure out, to find the language that would in some ways feel painterly. Because I knew I was dealing with art and creation and depicting and creating a kind of beauty. And in the film, I think this has translated to the film as well. For me, the film has a painterly quality. It is very beautiful to me, and it has the mood of a kind of painting. Sorry, this is going on so long, but when I first started working on the book, I went to Copenhagen, and there's a small museum there that just has paintings by Danish painters from the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And I went there for a very kind of practical reason. I went there because I wanted to see the kind of artwork that was being painted just before these two were painting, just to kind of understand the artistic context that they were painting into. But what I saw there was something very different. I saw, in some ways, these kind of classical Scandinavian scenes of an empty room and a sideboard with a green apple on it, or looking through a window into an empty room, or looking down a hallway with open door after open door, all in palettes of grays, gray blues, whites, tans, beiges, very subdued. Kind of, if you think of Scandinavia, that sort of that very kind of somewhat subdued colors, but a sense of feeling and passion just underneath the surface. And there's one artist in particular named Hammershøi, where he did these scenes of interiors, Copenhagen interiors. And I really looked to those paintings and in some ways borrowed their moods for the novel, the kind of that subdued feeling, that feeling of something just underneath the surface trying to break through. And I tried to take that mood of a painting and figure out the prose that could recreate that. And when Tom Hooper, the director, was working on Danish Girl, he fell in love with these paintings, these Hammershøi paintings. And in fact, many of the interiors of the Copenhagen where they lived in Copenhagen are recreations from these paintings, where he's depicted an interior and made a set out of it. And so that's sort of some of the ways where I look to the interior of the characters as well as the film.
Yeah, that's a very kind of organic aesthetic relationship between the two works. When Colm Tobin was here on this stage, we screened Brooklyn. He said something to the effect that if he had had the good fortune to see the film prior to writing his novel, that he might have made some changes in his novel, that he preferred the ending of the film to the ending in his novel, and there were some other issues. Is there any way that this film deepened your own understanding of your novel, or made you rethink how you might have approached your novel, or?
I can't think of how I might change it, just because I'm not that kind of writer. I tend not to look back, and in fact, as you said, I wrote this book in 2000, and then so many years passed until the movie came out, and in 2015 and 2016, I found myself talking about it again, and I hadn't read it in more than a decade. I mean, it really was a sort of, it was from the past. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I absolutely learned from the film. It goes back to the first question as well. That, and this is something I've tried to keep in mind when I'm writing, is that when Eddie Redmayne is trying to show that interior journey that character is on, a lot of the times he's not speaking. Eddie doesn't have any dialogue. It's a physical performance. It's something through the face, the flickering in the face, the eyes, and there's this idea that I saw when I saw the film, was of leaving it unsaid, and in fact, that part, I think some of the most powerful parts of his performance are when he actually he isn't speaking, and he's letting us see. And of course, this is something that I'm trying to keep in mind as I'm working on something new, sort of like sometimes it's best to leave it unsaid.